Wendi Elizabeth Andriano is an American female prisoner currently on death row in Arizona for murdering her terminally ill husband, Joe. She is incarcerated at the Lumley Unit in the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville. Wendi Elizabeth was born on August 6, 1970. In January 1994, she married Joseph Andriano. Not long into the marriage, however, Joe fell ill. After many misdiagnoses, Joe was finally diagnosed with adenoid cystic carcinoma in 1998. At that time, his illness had become terminal. Joe attempted holistic therapies for his illness, but by 2000, he had resorted to chemotherapy. By then, Wendi had given birth to 2 children and was working as an apartment manager, but she began resenting her increased responsibilities. She began to frequent bars and have affairs, and in August and September 2000, she made attempts to attain a life insurance policy for her husband. She even solicited friends to pose as her husband during the pre-screening processes, although no life insurance was ever purchased. During the early morning hours of October 8, 2000, Wendi Andriano bludgeoned her 33-year-old husband, Joe, to death with a bar stool. She stabbed him in the neck with a 13-inch knife in the couple's Ahwatukee, Arizona apartment. His autopsy revealed that he had sustained 23 blows to the skull, and traces of sodium azide were also found in his system. Approximately 1 hour before Joe's murder, his wife Wendi had called 911 at the behest of a co-worker, claiming that her terminally ill husband was dying. When paramedics arrived, however, Wendi turned them away, stating that Joe had a do not resuscitate order and that his wish was to die. Paramedics left the scene. 1 hour later, Wendi called 911 again, reporting that she had stabbed and beaten her husband to death in self-defense. She also made claims that her husband was physically and psychologically abusive toward her. However, being that Joe was weak from chemotherapy and sodium azide poisoning, he was unable to defend himself. Wendi was charged with murder. 4 years after the crime, on August 23, 2004, Wendi Andriano's murder trial began. Even though she had no prior criminal record, she faced the death penalty for her crime. Prosecutors stated that Wendi's motive for murdering her husband was money. Evidence was brought up about how Wendi had tried to instate a life insurance policy on her terminally ill husband. In addition, prosecutors alleged that she was tempted by a potential $20 million yield from a medical malpractice lawsuit filed against Joe's doctors. They attempted to prove that Wendi used a pesticide, sodium azide, to poison her husband to appear as if Joe's death was the result of a heart attack. At the trial, Wendi testified in her defense. For 9 days on the stand, she testified that her husband had battered her. She also stated that her husband, Joe, flew into a rage after she told him about her affair. She said there was a struggle with the knife. Despite her dramatic testimony, on November 18, 2004, Wendi's jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. A month later came her sentencing. Due to the heinousness, cruelty, and deprivation of the crime, and because the crime was financially motivated, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection on December 22, 2004. Wendi Andriano filed a post-conviction appeal in 2007, claiming that evidence of her affairs and efforts to buy life insurance policies for her ailing husband unfairly prejudiced her in front of the jury. She also claimed that jurors were not allowed to consider lesser charges, such as second-degree murder or manslaughter. Ultimately, her conviction was affirmed by the Arizona Supreme Court in July 2007. As of 2011, Wendi Andriano is one of 3 women on Arizona's death row, along with Deborah Jean Milk and Shauna Ford. Wendi's case was profiled on the Oxygen Network program Snapped on June 2, 2011, and the investigation discovery program Deadly Women on September 9, 2011. Wendi Andriano's husband became seriously ill and had to cease working. Allegedly resentful of her responsibilities, Wendi Andriano began frequenting bars and engaging in extramarital affairs. As her discontent increased, she hatched a scheme to kill her husband and profit from his death. She asked her friends if they would pose as her husband so that she could obtain a life insurance policy. She researched the effects of various poisons and how to get them discreetly. Andriano ordered poison and had it sent to a separate business. Although Andriano claimed that she was physically and psychologically abused by her husband, none of her friends ever observed any signs of abuse. Andriano began slipping sodium azide capsules to her husband. In the early morning hours of October 8, 2000, Andriano called 911 to report that her husband was having a heart attack, but when paramedics arrived, she turned them away. Several hours later, she again called 911 to report that she had stabbed and beaten him in self-defense. When paramedics arrived, they found Joe Andriano dead from repeated beatings and a stab wound to the neck. Weak from the poisoning and chemotherapy, he was unable to defend himself against Andriano, who struck him at least 20 times with a bar stool before stabbing him in the neck. The Arizona Supreme Court on Monday upheld the death sentence of a woman convicted of killing her cancer-stricken husband. The court rejected 11 separate arguments raised by lawyers for Wendi Andriano, 36, to have her first-degree murder conviction and death sentence overturned. Andriano was convicted in the October 8, 2000 death of her husband, Joe Andriano, who was terminally ill with cancer. The couple lived in the Phoenix community of Ahwatukee. During the trial, Prosecutor Martinez characterized Andriano as a greedy, cheating wife who killed her cancer-stricken husband in a shockingly evil way. Martinez alleged Wendi Andriano tried to pass off her husband's death as a heart attack to get money from a malpractice lawsuit. Joe Andriano was struck in the head at least 23 times and stabbed in the neck. Investigators also found pesticide in his stomach and evidence that his wife had been trying to poison him for a substantial period. Wendi Andriano testified for 9 days in her defense and claimed her husband had battered her. She said he flew into a rage when she told him she had an affair, and the two got into a struggle with a knife. In her appeal, Wendi Andriano claimed that evidence of her affairs and efforts to buy life insurance policies for her ailing husband unfairly prejudiced her in front of the jury. She also argued that the jury should have been allowed to consider the lesser crimes of second-degree murder and manslaughter. She raised questions about the jury's deliberations during the penalty phase when they appeared deadlocked, and the judge offered to answer legal questions to help them reach a decision. She said the judge's actions were jury coercion. She claimed the state's method of execution by lethal injection was cruel and unusual punishment under the U.S. Constitution because exact drug doses and potential problems with the technique are not spelled out in the law. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous 39-page opinion, rejected all in turn. Andriano is one of only 2 women on Arizona's death row. A defense attorney Friday will ask a judge to toss out an Ahwatukee Foothills woman's death sentence, saying the same judge should not have urged deadlocked jurors to continue deliberations. Wendi Andriano, 34, was sentenced to death 2 days later by jurors, who said the vote was 11-1 when they sent Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Brian Ishikawa a note asking him to describe the procedure if they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Defense attorney Dan Patterson wrote in his December 29th motion for a new trial that Ishikawa erred by sending jurors a note with suggestions. To resolve the apparent impasse, Andriano, 34, wept when the death verdict was returned by jurors on December 22nd, becoming the second woman on Arizona's death row. Jurors found her guilty of first-degree murder on November 18th in the bludgeoning of her husband, Joe, 33, a terminal cancer patient. Patterson's bid for a new sentencing could be the first step in a long series of anticipated appeals. Under state law, a death verdict is automatically appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court. The supplemental instruction should have included provisions that the jury was not required to deliberate further, that a hung jury was permissible under the law, and that a sentencing decision in a capital case is a personal, individual, moral decision, Patterson wrote. Patterson made a similar objection when Ishikawa consulted with the attorneys after receiving the note from jury forewoman Barbara Bauer, which read, "If we are unable to reach a unanimous verdict, what is the procedure that will be followed?" But Ishikawa overruled Patterson's objection and sent jurors a note anyway, suggesting they identify areas of agreement and disagreement and write down any questions of law that he could answer. Prosecutor Juan Martinez wrote that Ishikawa did nothing wrong. He said including in the note that hung juries are permissible could have encouraged the jury to abandon its efforts to reach a verdict. Jurors said they had not given up reaching a verdict when they sent Ishikawa the note, even though one holdout. Juror, an older man from Gilbert, was adamantly opposed to a death sentence at that time. Jurors unanimously supported the death penalty after the holdout changed his mind. Juror Linda Percy said she would not have been satisfied with the hung jury on the sentencing phase of Andriano's trial. "We have put 4 months of our life into this. I'll be damned if we go out a hung jury," she said. But jurors didn't rush to judgment either, carefully weighing the 23 reasons of leniency listed by defense attorneys before sentencing Andriano, Percy said. "When dealing with someone's life, you're looking at everything. We did not take it lightly at all," she said. The lives of all the jurors changed to accommodate the 17-week trial. In interviews with the Ahwatukee Republic in January, jurors said their jury service was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, with several saying it renewed their faith in the justice system. Here is a look at some of what they had to say. Linda Percy, 63, a realtor in Gilbert, said the trial devastated her business life. It prevented her from visiting her ailing 97-year-old grandmother in West Virginia in October. "It deprived me of a chance to see her before she died," Percy said. She sent her son as a substitute. Percy said that finding Andriano guilty of first-degree murder was very easy. She did not believe Andriano was a battered woman, saying that nearly any relationship qualified as abusive under defense expert Sharon Murphy's definition. Percy said reaching the death sentence was much more difficult. "It was a tough decision, but it was right," she said. "I have children close to her age. That was hard. That's why I looked at things over and over again. I just wanted to make sure, and I hope future jurors will do the same." Tanner Catalano, 27, of Gilbert, was between jobs, looking for work when he was selected. He said the trial put his plans to find a new job on hold. A former college hockey player, he worked as a part-time hockey official at the Ice Den in Scottsdale during the trial and played hockey to relieve stress. "I've played on many hockey teams in my life, but nothing compared to this," Catalano said. "After you go through something like that, it's like a family." He said the stress from the trial was the worst at night. "All the facts go through your mind, all the pictures, everything you have to weigh. A 3-day weekend that delayed deliberations was tough. That was the worst that weekend. I probably slept at the max 4 to 5 hours. But he said his stress was nothing compared to Joe and Wendi Andriano's families. Juror Mary Phobes, 74, a retiree from Mesa, said she enjoyed being on the jury for the most part. Phobes was bothered by Andriano blaming the murder on a suicide pact, with Joe, a defense that she and other jurors never bought. She would not or could not say that she killed him, Phobes said. She never did admit to the murder. Phobes also found her mind racing at night after hearing evidence for about 4 hours a day. "A lot of times, I would lose sleep or dream about the trial," she said. "I guess I was worrying about whether I was doing the right thing or making up my mind." Alternate juror Martha Colvin said Andriano was guilty but would have avoided execution if she had not lied to cover up her crimes. Colvin, 54, of Mesa, and fellow alternate Lisa Flores said they would not have voted for execution. They were chosen as alternates at random. "I empathized with that little girl. I was terrified they would hang her," Colvin said. I would not want to be one of the 12 that put that little girl to death. Colvin, who said her late brother was a corrections officer on death row, believes she could have convinced other jurors to give Andriano a life sentence. Juror J. Irk, 48, of Mesa, an aircraft mechanic, said he enjoyed his jury duty because it was a 4-month reprieve from a graveyard shift. It also allowed Irky, going through a divorce, to see more of his 4-year-old. There was a little bit of anxiety, he said, having that power, that control, over somebody's destiny. Irke decided the cruelty of Joe Andriano outweighed mitigating factors, but also thought Wendi Andriano was financially motivated, trying to pull the perfect murder by poisoning her husband and passing off his death as a heart attack. But Irke said Wendi panicked when she hit Joe in the head 23 times with a bar stool and stabbed him in the neck. Her anxiety did her in, he said. Wendi Andriano, sentenced yesterday, poisoned and stabbed her terminally ill husband. The Associated Press, a woman convicted of poisoning and stabbing her terminally ill husband, was sentenced to death yesterday, becoming the second woman on Arizona's death row. The jury, which had deliberated the sentence since December 1st, struggled to decide whether to seek the execution of Wendi Andriano. Jurors reported to Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Brian Ishikawa this week that they could not decide. He sent them back for more deliberations. Andriano, who was convicted of first-degree murder on November 18th, cried as the sentence was read. The sentence didn't provide closure, said the family of her husband, Joe Andriano. I don't think I'll ever get over this, said his mother, Jeanette Andriano. We're going to go on with our lives. We have faith in God. We have friends and family who have supported us. The family will take care of the Andrianos' 2 young children. I miss my brother. It's going to be hard to tell them everything that's happened, said Jania Lambeth, Joe Andriano's sister, who will raise Wendi Andriano's 6-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son. During the trial, prosecutor Juan Martinez characterized Andriano as a greedy, cheating wife who poisoned her husband with pesticide, slashed his neck, and bashed his head as she hastened his death in a shockingly evil way. Martinez said Andriano tried to pass off her 33-year-old husband's October 8, 2000, death as a heart attack to get money from a malpractice lawsuit. Andriano, who testified for 9 days in her defense, claimed her husband battered her. She said he flew into a rage when she told him she'd had an affair, and the two got into a struggle with a knife. Andriano was fighting a rare form of cancer. Joe Andriano was struck in the head at least 23 times and stabbed in the neck, said investigators, who added that pesticide was found in the victim's stomach. The other woman on death row in Arizona is Deborah Milk, who plotted the murder of her 4-year-old son in 1989. 10 women have been executed nationwide since 1976, when the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty, the Death Penalty Information Center said. 1 woman has been put to death in Arizona. In 1930, 52-year-old Eva Dugan was hanged for killing a Tucson rancher. Her head came off in the process. A greedy, cheating wife poisoned her terminally ill husband with pesticide, slashed his neck, and bashed his head as she hastened his death in a shockingly evil way, a prosecutor said Wednesday. Wendi Andriano, 34, was convicted on November 18 of first-degree murder in the death of her husband, Joe Andriano. She could become the second woman on Arizona's death row. Jurors began deliberating Wednesday whether aggravating factors exist to warrant the death penalty. Prosecutors said Andriano tried to pass off her husband's October 8, 2000, death as a heart attack to get money from a malpractice lawsuit. This woman saw her husband as nothing more than a pot of gold, Martinez told jurors. Greed, that is what this is all about to her. Using a battered wife defense, Wendi Andriano claimed her husband went into a rage when she told him she had an affair, and the two got into a struggle with a knife. This is a case of domestic violence, said Daniel Patterson, Andriano's attorney. Joe. Andriano, 33, was struck in the head at least 23 times and stabbed in the neck. Investigators also found pesticide in his stomach. Wendi Andriano, who took the stand for 9 days, said her cancer-ridden husband took the poison to end his suffering. She claimed he stabbed himself. If jurors do not find aggravating factors, the judge will sentence the woman to either 25 years to life or life without the possibility of parole. If they do, the defense will explain why Andriano shouldn't receive the death penalty before she is sentenced. Last week, Wendi Andriano told jurors her husband took poison-filled capsules to end his life and his struggle with cancer. On Tuesday, the 34-year-old Ahwatukee Foothills woman could not explain how the poison got inside a pot of soup and bowls found in their apartment following his death. "You put that in that food, didn't you?" Prosecutor Juan Martinez asked Andriano in Maricopa County Superior Court in Mesa. "No, sir," Andriano replied. "It was in the soup, though, wasn't it?" Martinez insisted. "That's what the tests say," Andriano said. Andriano is accused of poisoning, beating, and stabbing to death Joseph Andriano, 33, on October 8, 2000. Prosecutors allege Wendi Andriano wanted her husband dead, believing she could get as much as $20 million from a medical malpractice lawsuit filed against his doctors. The prosecution is attempting to prove Wendi Andriano used a pesticide bought under a false name to poison her husband, thinking it would appear as though he died of a heart attack. Witnesses have testified the mother of two had 2 affairs before Joseph Andriano's death and spent weeks trying in vain to get extra life insurance on him. During 4 days of testimony, last week, Wendi Andriano told jurors she was a battered wife, and it was her husband's idea to obtain the poison and the extra life insurance. Wendi Andriano said that her husband panicked after taking the poison and asked her to take him to the hospital. After one of her friends convinced her to call 911, her husband changed his mind again, she said. The friend and paramedics testified that Wendi Andriano refused to come to the door when the paramedics arrived. Eventually, they testified, freshly showered, Wendi Andriano came out a side door and walked around the building to tell them to leave. When Wendi Andriano called them back several minutes later, Joseph Andriano was dead. Wendi Andriano said her husband would not allow her to let the paramedics in and was insistent upon dying. However, after her husband took the poison-filled capsules, he begged her to explain why a condom was missing from his bureau, Wendi Andriano said. He went berserk when she confessed to a one-night stand and tried to strangle her with a phone cord. She was able to cut the cord with a kitchen knife, and when he tried to get the knife, she said she beat him with a bar stool. Moments later, Wendi Andriano said her husband stabbed himself in the neck. Wendi Andriano denied Martinez's suggestion that she beat and stabbed her husband to death and showered in the moments before the paramedics arrived. "You're grossly mistaken," Wendi Andriano said. "You are so wrong."